I love the the contrast between our videos. Like yours is like
you're
super set. I'm like in a bunker somewhere in a remote location. Like world is over shit, and that's what my space looks like. And yours is just like everything's fine.
I think it like goes well towards our dynamic. I feel like we should go on video at some point because your end of world bunker, your fucking license plate with the Liberty statue back there,
You
just
can
got
see
it at
that?
an awkward angle. Yeah, I can see that.
Oh, shit.
I can see it all, dude. You literally look like you're recording from some doomsday bunker basement, or like you're some kook who hides from the CIA. It's amazing, actually.
All those things are very true. I have very little outside communication with the world, except for you. You're the only thing that I know that makes things exist, which would be hysterical if like there's like a cut video of behind you, like everything else is just like squalor, but you're doing this just to keep me sane.
Maybe that should just be our background video. It should just be like riots and burning and looting and everything. Like cartoon-like though, so that it's whimsical and enjoyable.
Yeah. That goes well with our theme.
Oh, God. Yeah, exactly. It does go well with our theme. Yeah, so it's funny. I've been like sketching this one out for a while, and I ran with it the last 2 days. I put together like, I think 17 or 18,000 words here.
Jeez.
Yeah, that's why I was like, we got to break this up because this is going to be like 2.5 hours in total. And it totally didn't go where I expected it to go. It's not at all. Where I started was not where I ended with this. I'd read a book 10 years ago about the concentration camps in Nazi Germany, and it was horrific and depressing. And I was kind of like, all right, how can I weave this in with what's going on with Alligator Alcatraz and all that shit? And this story just didn't go where I wanted to go. So I'm focusing on camps, but there is zero Nazis in this, Adam.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So-
All right. Because when you say concentration camps, I know it's not like a focusing class. So I've just really got to like, not sure. I don't know if people think I know what you're going to actually talk about other than like the brief synopsis of a topic, and concentration camps always go to Nazi Germany.
This is, yes, correct. This is about something else entirely.
All right. Let's hear it.
So welcome to yet another episode of Idiots Seeking Village, where we try and make sense of the senseless. Adam, I don't know if you've seen the videos of Portland over the past week or two, but I liken us to the Darth Vader mask-wearing, unicycle-riding bagpiper who's riding around the ICE agents playing "This Land Is Your Land" just to annoy them.
That was a good one. It's the rioting is being done by blow-up animals. Basically, people in costumes. Halloween's coming early.
There was a guy, I think, in a leopard costume, or maybe it was a giraffe, and he had a microphone, and he was singing Rod Stewart loudly, like karaoke style, to the ICE agents. And at one point, they just, like 3 or 4 of them go over and just grab him and just drag him into the building. It's actually both hilarious and horrifying at the exact same time.
Because the frog has been the most, I guess, he's become the famous one on like the memes and the things where him like standing up to them. But it's like, do you remember like a Noriega and how they try to get him out of his compound by playing like hard, heavy metal rock music consistently?
I'd actually forgotten that's what they did.
And that's when you just said that, it just triggered that. I was just like, look at that. We're taking a page out of something.
Well, it gave me, I was thinking about it, because I'm watching these videos, and obviously, I think I sent you one of the links, right? It's the overlay of, what's her name? Gnome talking, right, during that stupid round table that they did this week. And just a video of what's actually happening on the street, how absurd it all is. But I was thinking, if Portlanders aren't actively blasting just annoying music at all hours outside of the ICE compounds, wherever they're sleeping or attempting to sleep, I feel like that's a missed opportunity if they are not doing it. And you're right, we've done it to Noriega, or people have done it to Noriega, and yeah, it's definitely a valid method.
But also, you got to think of, you're also punishing the immigrants who are staying there too. They're like, I don't understand what they're saying.
So I'm pretty confident, and after these 2 episodes here, yeah, that's big news. Again, it's a first for us. We're gonna be doing a 2-parter here today because there's just so much to cover. You're not going to be confident that they're sleeping in that same facility as the detainees. Not after what we go through.
Okay, interesting.
So let's get going. Yeah, no, this is two-parter. I think we're going to run like 2.5 hours total, so we'll split it up roughly in half. There's too many goodies to leave out here, and just because everyone involved is terrible and everything involved is terrible, and I don't feel like it's fair or proper to only shit on some countries and not others, including ourselves. So, Adam, how do you feel about the mass incarceration of groups of people designated as political targets and generally shoddily constructed semi-permanent structures?
So it's a wonderful thing. I love it. It's just so very uplifting for the American spirit.
I think when inevitably you get carried away by ICE, I'm going to remind you of that approach.
It's just a clusterfuck of epic proportions and seems to get worse every week.
It does seem to get worse every week. There's just so much video, right, and everything about it. But I think it's important to take a look at immigration in general, and enforcement is a very large and complicated issue. What I want to focus on is specifically detention. Within detention, there is a long history of concentration camps and how they've been used, how they've evolved over the years, and I think it's important for us to take a look at that and how that compares to today to put what we're doing into context and to see how we got here.
Okay.
And I think I want to be very clear. We're not going to be talking about the Nazis pretty much at all in this episode. That's not how I originally intended this episode to go, not the original inspiration for writing about this subject, because, and I think this is critical, is the term concentration camp has absorbed and become synonymous with extermination camps,
yes.
Death camps, right? Auschwitz, Treblinka, Majdanek, Belzec, Helmno, Sobibor. And so people have this view that concentration camps equals death, and more specifically, mass murder committed by the state. And we saw this actually back in June of 2019 during an Instagram live discussion. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, stated the United States is running concentration camps on our southern border, and that is exactly what they are. They are concentration camps. Never again means something. We need to do something about it. And that statement touched off a flurry of response at the time, both valid and otherwise, and a lot of criticism. I think the best criticism came from the Foreign Policy Research Institute, who I just want to quote here real quick. At worst, casually using such terms perpetuates the disturbing trend of minimizing the Holocaust by effectively making it one example among many of human rights abuses, rather than the ultimate example of genocidal atrocity conducted by a nation state. And I agree with that statement, right? The deeply anti-human atrocities of the Nazi regime can't and should be minimized. And we touched on that kind of in our prior podcast episodes, right? The motivations behind fascism, why it appeals to certain types of people, and how easily you could be manipulated into shit that objectively you would never have started off being on board with, right?
No,
and how violence can
absolutely.
escalate.
And I think what's funny, because when you told me that we were going to do concentration camps, I automatically went like, oh, Jesus, we're going to like World War II and Jews being, but maybe it's like an active role in changing the name, because a concentration camp is really just concentrating a group of people into a place. But you just said the word that is what we should change it to, the extermination camps, and really make a strong definition of separating those two things. So when you say concentration camp, it's not like, oh man, we're going to exterminate people. No, those are two different things.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that wasn't my intention coming into this. Again, I read this book, The KL by Nicholas Voxman 10 years ago. Horrific, depressing, but really eye-opening as to what happened in Nazi Germany, right? And how those camps developed. That wasn't what I thought was going to happen when I started digging in on this. But I realized, yeah, it's important for us because you don't start with mass extermination, right? That is the conclusion of a series of progressive steps. It is the cumulative weight of choice after choice that singles out groups and individuals, labels them as others, labels them as dangerous, undeserving of equal protection under the law, and in need of extraordinary action to be dealt with. So we're not going to be talking Einsatzgruppen. We're not going to be talking about mass shootings of conquered territories. We're not going to talk about CO2 gas fans that led to the death camps, right? And there's a million different resources on it. I think it's been covered ad nauseum. I would just suggest, if that's what you're looking for, Google Holocaust Museum near me and go visit. Or go through their online resources, right, and start there. If you're big on like the Hollywood experience and you're a little bit ADHD and you're not going to be able to sit through a museum for a few hours, I would recommend the movie Conspiracy. I don't know if you've ever seen that one, Adam, but it's an all-star cast. Colin Firth, Stanley Tucci, Kenneth Branagh. It covers the Wannsee Conference, where the legal framework of the final solution was completed. It basically happens entirely within a mansion in the suburbs of Berlin, and it is riveting, given the horrible context, right, of what they're talking about. I would highly recommend it if that's the direction you want to go in. But that's not what we're doing today. So yes, I think we need to define first, before we get into anything, what is a concentration camp? And I found a definition from the Leo Baeck Institute that I think covers it really well and I like. Quote, a concentration camp is a place where a large number of inmates, often those deemed political enemies or members of ethnic and religious minorities, are confined against their will and under guard, usually without having been charged with a crime. Punitive conditions of internment usually result in a high rate of mortality. Does that make sense to you? Any questions or anyone you want to push back on any of that?
Well, the high death of mortality, then it starts to bleed into a form of extermination camp.
In a sense, but
it's like that's not our overarching goal is to exterminate you, but if you happen to die while staying here, that wouldn't be such a bad thing. That's the vibe I'm getting.
What we're going to learn as we go through this is that high rate of mortality is both accidental and deliberate at the same time. It's, to your point, it's to the people who are running the camps and making these decisions, it's a happy accident because, again, we don't care about the people who are inside, right? And especially as we get more to the modern era, that becomes a bigger and bigger thing. So where do concentration camps, Adam? Where do they come from? I want to give you 3 guesses as to which nations pioneered this.
Concentration camps.
Yeah,
this
take
is
a
good
shot.
one. I could see us doing that with Native Americans, but I would say maybe it's even earlier than that. I'm going to go with France. I'm going to take a detour.
Fuck the French. Okay, so you said Native Americans, so America and France. Do you want to take a third guess?
I would assume European because I would assume it would have happened with Italy.
Italians, fuck the Italians, huh?
I'm just trying to think of like Roman times that they would have probably like Byzantine. I've got to go back to like the early days of like some form of civilization where we would have just rounded up people of either color or maybe Greece and Turkey. Whatever. I made my choices. That's it.
All right, fair enough. I think 1 out of 3 ain't bad. We're not going that far back into history. We're starting in the 19th century with America, the British, and the Spanish.
The Spanish.
Who, yes, all had major contributions to our current understanding of large-scale militarized temporary holding facilities, but because that are our understanding of concentration camps. We're going to start with America and a little Supreme Court ruling called Johnson v. McIntosh from 1823. In it, Chief Justice Marshall held that only the federal government holds the exclusive right to acquire land from indigenous nations, which led to the doctrine of discovery, essentially legalizing the concept of colonialism in the Americas by denying Indians sovereign ownership of their lands. Quick quote from the ruling: discovery gave an exclusive right to extinguish the Indian title of occupancy, whether by purchase or by conquest. End quote. Basically, you live here, but the land is legally ours and belongs to us. So why do I bring up a Supreme Court ruling on native sovereignty? Well, it led almost directly to the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Mr. President Andrew Jackson, Donald Trump's favorite president, which primarily targeted the Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole tribes in the Southeast, known as the 5 civilized tribes, for relocation to the West. You'll remember this from elementary school as the Trail of Tears.
Right.
So under the act, the federal government negotiated treaties aimed at clearing Indian-occupied land for white settlers in exchange for what largely amounted to a land swap. For the Cherokee specifically, this culminated in the Treaty of New Echota in 1835, where the tribe received $5 million in exchange for their native territory and land in the West. Between 1836 and 1838, the bulk of the Cherokee were relocated. I'm going to quote from the Cherokee Nation's website here. From a beginning, soldiers took the Cherokee to forts, emigration depots, or other areas to form them into larger groups, detachments, for the march west. From these homes and other buildings that no longer remain, the Cherokee were driven to cramped, unhealthy assembly centers in each state, which served as temporary holding locations from which larger groups would then go to one of 3 emigration depots. Though the Trail of Tears began with the forcing of individuals from their homes, the National Park Service interprets the trail as primarily having 3 trailheads: the immigration depots at Fort Cass near Charleston, Tennessee, Ross's Landing near Chattanooga, Tennessee, and near Fort Payne, Alabama. So these, Adam, this wasn't Club Med, right? These camps were described as cramped with unhealthy conditions, as well as the wagons, which would transport the supplies for the deportees. Per a write-up by the Leo Beck Institute, many Native Americans died in these immigration depots due to the rapid spread of disease and poor sanitary conditions.
So we pivoted from depot to camp, huh?
Yeah, pretty much. Conceptually, this is the beginning of it, right? We're assembling people in groups to coalesce them and then move them into larger camps to aggregate them for the move out west, right? This is the very beginnings of it. Continuing from the Cherokee Nation. Armed soldiers flushed the Cherokee out of their homes and stripped them of valuable possessions. Tightly packed in holding centers, they found that food and water were scarce and disease and death were common. From those assembled at Rattlesnake Springs, for example, 13 organized detachments made the journey west. While most walked, the infirm and mothers of young children traveled in wagons. Space was limited because food, blankets, and other supplies occupied most of the room. Those who were still alive 5 months later found themselves in Indian territory. So rightfully, the focus on the Trail of Tears and similar displacements is the inhumanity of the travel conditions and the casualty rate of those being displaced. But right here, we see the start of that kind of military state-run detention center for the purpose of deportation of large groups of civilians. Mm-hmm. This really starts setting the framework for what starts to come later. And many of the same criticisms you find even today when it comes to migrant detention, right? The poor conditions, no medical care, food, water, access to sleep and space, they don't exist here. In particular, it's the destination for these tribes that starts to give us an even stronger conceptual framework, the invention of the reservations, a mechanism to create separation between native tribes and white settlers. Again, the purpose of the camps is to isolate groups from the general population that you don't want interacting. And I think it tracks that the army and the government, right, implemented these against the native tribes, that they would use them and that they would then use them in other situations. If we fast forward about 25 years, we get to the Civil War. So first thing I want to draw attention to is the Andersonville POW camp from the National Park Service. Andersonville National Historic Site began as a stockade built around 18 months before the end of the U.S. Civil War to hold Union Army prisoners captured by Confederate soldiers. Located deep behind Confederate lines, the 26.5-acre Camp Sumter was designed for a maximum of 10,000 prisoners. At its most crowded, it held more than 32,000 men, many of them wounded and starving in horrific conditions with rampant disease, contaminated water, and only minimal shelter from the blazing sun and the chilling winter rain. In the prison's 14 months of existence, some 45,000 Union prisoners arrived here. Of those, nearly 13,000 died and were buried in a cemetery created just outside the prison walls. So we're at war. These are enemy soldiers. Mm-hmm. And now here's the fun part. Do you want to guess whom the U.S. government used these concepts against next?
Japanese? Was that too far in advance?
No, we're too
Slaves?
far ahead. Our very own U.S. citizens.
Okay.
From the Foreign Policy Research Institute. After the early battles of 1861 and 1862, the Confederate States Army held a surplus of prisoners of war from the Union Army. Under a cartel signed on July 22, 1862, The two sides agreed to exchange prisoners on a rank-for-rank and man-for-man basis, with the remainder of the prisoners released to their home governments on parole, not to participate in hostilities until duly exchanged. Union authorities feared that sending such paroled men home on furloughs would lead to mass desertions, as they would not return to their regiments upon being notified of their exchange. Thus, the War Department created Camp Parole, Maryland, a massive compound housing thousands of Union troops awaiting exchange. The men were effectively treated as prisoners of war, held by their own government, with armed guards patrolling the perimeter of the camp, and extremely unsanitary conditions prevalent within the stockade. Hundreds of soldiers escaped the compound and deserted from the army, many after the fact claiming they did so out of a fear that they would not survive very long inside the camp. So yeah, we've gone from arresting Native American tribes and putting them in camps to housing POWs, which is not uncommon, right, in any war, to detaining our own troops, our own citizens, out of fear of what they're going to do next. It didn't take very long, Adam. It took less than 3 decades for that to happen.
It's like, you might run away, so we're going to imprison you, and you might die and not be used anyway? Oh, God.
They didn't want them to go AWOL. Yeah, they justified it that way.
But it's like, you're basically technically AWOL if you're in a prison. You know, you're not being used for anything. What are you abandoning? Nothing.
At least the commanders know where you are. That's kind of important for the army. Yeah. At the same time, camps were also constructed for newly freed slaves, as they were technically, at that time, captured enemy property and were in the awkward transition between slavery and being able to support themselves as freed people. Some 25,000 were housed in camps along the Mississippi in poor conditions, in desperate need of medical care, among others. A report by James Yeatman to the Western Sanitary Commission in December of 1863. At Natchez, there is a large freedmen's camp numbering 2,100 for whom rations are drawn. The cabins are built of good plank, but are poorly constructed, many of them without chimneys, the only escape for smoke being through a hole left where the chimney should be. They are all without proper light and ventilation, and being overcrowded, are the most prolific sources of disease. There is much sickness, suffering, and destitution in this camp. There was not one house that I visited where death had not entered its portals. 75 had died in a single day. I was informed that some had returned to their masters on account of their suffering. This camp had numbered 4,000 at one time. Now it is reduced to 2,100. So yeah, dude, the former slaves are like, fuck this, put me back into slavery. Yeah. I'm out of here. That's
slavery is a better option than this was. If this is what you call freedom, slavery is so much better. It's the limitations of what man can do in creating an environment that is conducive for humans and being able to try to hold all of them in a short period of time. It's limiting, and we seem not to grasp that fact. All right, how many do we have? 5,000. All right, how often can we build a little home for them? 1 a week. All right, so like 2 weeks, bring them over? It's like...
Yep. Continuing from Yeatman's report, I'm not going to read this, but basically at another camp, he went through like over a dozen camps, right? He went up and down the Mississippi to look at this. Another camp, Young's Point, housed a little over 2,000 freed slaves. And when he was there in the summer of 1863, some 30 to 50 died every single day because of the conditions in that camp. And that was pretty consistent for all the ones he visited. These are just 2 of the larger ones.
What would have been the alternative for them, since they're freed, but they're still considered property and they don't really have anywhere to go? What would have been the alternative for them? Where would they have gone? They would just been what we call homeless people now, and hopefully they would have fared better. What would have been the alternative?
That's part of the justification for it, right? Is, I think, if I recall correctly, the Emancipation Proclamation passed in 1863. So at this point, legally in the North, that would have applied, but the 13th Amendment hadn't yet passed. If I recall correctly, if I recall my time frame here, right? So again, technically, they're legally the property of a nation we're at war with, but that nation is ourselves. Again, technically. So they couldn't legally just take this property, again, slaves were property, these people were considered property, and just let them go, right, out into the world and make it themselves. So you bring up a good point, right? Like, what do? Do you just flood northern states with these refugees who have
Yeah, it would have been just the
few job
first
skills,
refugee crisis.
no family support? Exactly. So there wasn't a good option at the time, really. And so, yeah, this was what you should be gathering from a lot of this is the conditions and situations of concentration camps and just detention of people en masse is often a short-term, short-sighted response to a crisis situation.
Right. Now, sometimes these crisis situations are man-made, invented by the people who are, hence like the ice camps and stuff like that.
Correct, and we're gonna see this whole episode. These 2 episodes are gonna be rhyme game.
Here's the jingle. We got the
exactly.
Rhyme time.
You got to write that one up. I don't know if we're gonna use it, but I'm gonna hold you to it. All right. So far, America #1, baby. Woo!
We're great again. We're great again.
This is the making us great again that we're referring to. But we're not the only bastards in this story. So, as I mentioned, let's move to the Spanish. So a few years later, they got into the concentration camp game during 2 separate conflicts. The first was the Cuban War of Independence, which ran from 1895 to 1898. This specific one was the last of 3 series of wars for Cuban independence. The Captain General, or Governor, Arsenio Martinez Campos, was struggling with a guerrilla insurgency campaign by the Cuban forces. After a defeat in open battle, he was facing increasing pressure from the Spanish government to wage a more brutal, scorched earth-style campaign. He refused and resigned his position. But he wrote a letter outlining the concept of Reconcentrados, aka concentration camps, to isolate the guerrilla rebel groups from the non-combatant population. Basically, he knew these guerrillas were being supplied by the villagers in the countryside. That's where they were getting. That's why they were continuing to fight him. So he comes up with Reconcentrados. Sorry, I'm not a Spanish speaker. But he wouldn't do it. He wrote this up. He was like, I'm not fucking implementing this. He goes, this is beyond, I'm not doing this. So Spanish officer Valeriano Weyler replaced Campos, and he immediately set to implementing the Reconcentrado policy, where rural Cubans were given 8 days to relocate into fortified towns and camps under the threat of execution if found outside these areas. From EBSCO.com. After proclaiming martial law and bolstering the number of troops patrolling the trochas, Weyler sought to destroy the rebel power base by ordering the entire populations of certain target regions into concentration camps. This Reconcentrado policy was initially successful in hampering rebel operations, though Macheo's forces remained very active. Reports of atrocities of greater and lesser veracity poured out of Cuba and began inflaming American public opinion against Spain. Disease, starvation, and executions resulting from the Reconcentrados killed a conservatively estimated 480,000 people.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so Spain took a look at what we were doing and was like, double or nothing. So, thanks to 2 events, the election of William McKinley and the publication of these atrocities by William Randolph Hearst's various publications, U.S. sentiment and political will turned against the Spanish and in favor of the Cubans. Once the USS Maine sank in Havana Harbor, you would have learned at school, the War of Independence morphed into the Spanish-American War. There was like a 3-month overlap. The revolution ended and the war started. And the result of which, we won't go into detail, the U.S. acquired multiple Spanish overseas colonies, including the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Guam, and I just lost it. And not Cuba. They got control of foreign policy of Cuba, but not actual control of Cuba. The treaty we signed is also the reason Bad Bunny is performing the Super Bowl halftime show this year as an American citizen. I'm looking at you, Turning Point USA.
What's funny is they used to always have, like, when I was like in college, or whatever, they used to have rival Super Bowl shows on TV and stuff like that, because the Super Bowl halftime show was lame. It's still lame because I'm like, I don't really care about these guys who are performing most of the time. Even if I like them, I'm like, this is not like the scene for it. And we'd go on to, like, because Beavis and Butthead would have a halftime show. Turn that on.
You're right. It used to be a lot more diverse. Now we've got the Turning Point show this year. There was the lingerie bowl. Do you remember that one for a couple
Yes.
years?
And then the puppy Super Bowl or whatever they would do.
Well, that's what we do as a family. We watch the Puppy Bowl, man. It's actually freaking hilarious. Actually, they do a really good job with that one. And then we look, and then of course everyone in my family looks at me. Is like, "Can we get another one?" I'm like, "We've got too many. We've already got 3. Like, stop it."
Anyway. Becoming a boarding house. You're going to become a concentration camp of dogs.
I don't. Why you got to say that? Why you got to say doggy concentration camp? That's all. God, Adam, I can't take you anywhere.
But they have a very nice pampered life. I wonder, there must be a threshold at some point where they start looking at each other and like, you're really fucking shit up to the other dogs. You get another one? Yo, Dad, what's up? Another one?
So, for many reasons, let's use the Puppy Bowl. Let's come back to the U.S. being the complete bastards in this story. So, if you remember, right, we acquired the Philippines as part of the Spanish-American War peace treaty. They wanted independence. And after a brief war, the story goes, or at least we largely learned in high school, we happily gave it to them, and everyone, all's well that ends well. The truth is, the U.S. was a rising modern industrial state that was sweeping aside the vestiges of the old European imperial order. And the Philippines gave the U.S. a beachhead to project power in Asia and the Western Pacific in a way that we just had never had before. So it wasn't the kind of the all's well ends well, and we move on with this. The resulting Philippine-American War ran in 2 phases between 1899 and 1913. In short, the U.S. leveraged 3 key elements to try and suppress the guerrilla tactics of the ethnic Moro insurgents. The first was the forced relocations of civilians into concentration camps, just like Weiler did in Cuba. We took notes, right? We were horrified at the atrocities, and we're like,
we could do better.
What better? Right. We're America. Of course we can do better. Again, to separate the guerrilla fighters from civilians and deprive them of resources. The second was what they called the water cure, which involved forced pouring of water down a captive's throat until their stomach ballooned. The U.S. troops would then either punch the captive in the stomach or hit them with the butt of a rifle to forcibly expel the water. They would repeat this until information that they wanted was received. Basically,
primitive
the predecessor to waterboarding. Exactly. Instead of, And the last one that they implemented was called the deadline, or free fire zone, around the concentration camps. Basically, anyone, civilian or soldier, 12 years of age or older, was considered an enemy combatant and fair game to be shot and killed. It was essentially the ultimate PvP zone.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So a write-up by Brett Wilkins on commondreams.org gives us some of the gory details. Because we're going to dig into the gory details, Adam. We're not going to skip this. As General Hell-Roaring Jake Smith ordered his troops to kill everyone over 10 in Samar, future President William Howard Taft, the U.S. colonial administrator of the archipelago, instituted a pacification campaign that combined the counterinsurgency tactics of torture and summary execution with deportation and imprisonment in concentration camps, or Reconcentrados, that one commandant referred to as the suburbs of hell. General J. Franklin Bell, looking forward to his new post as warden of the notorious Batangas Reconcentrado, declared that all consideration and regard for the inhabitants of this place cease from the day I become commander.
Classy.
Oof. Yeah, classy. And he meant it. In December of 1901, Bell gave the people of the Batangas 2 weeks to leave their homes and report to the camp. Everything they left behind, their homes, farms, livestock, food stores, tools, was stolen or destroyed by U.S. troops. People who refused to report to the camp were shot, as were random prisoners whenever insurgents killed an American. Conditions were beyond horrific in many Reconcentrados. Hunger, disease, and torture, which included the waterboarding, were rampant. In some camps, as many as 20% of internees died. In order to save food, 1,300 Batangas prisoners were forced to dig mass graves before being gunned down 20 at a time and buried in them. To keep them prisoners would necessitate the placing of U.S. soldiers on short rations, one soldier explained. There was nothing to do but kill them.
It's every time we have these ideas, it's like, okay, this is going to work better this time. It never does. It's like, okay, remember what they did? We could do our own little take and twist on it and improve it. We'll do it this way. And it either becomes incredibly more savage or it just really doesn't work at all. At some point, you got to ask, like, do we really need to conquer these people? Like, what are we going to really get out of this long term? It's like, holy crap. It never works.
They do better, but you have to remember that is a relative term. And depending on your point of view, do better means do more horribly to others.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, remember, this is the exact same shit we justified as the atrocities for getting into the Spanish-American War. Right? And we're doing it right here immediately after. So now we finally get to history's greatest monsters, the English. So at the same time as Spain was implementing its Reconcentrado policy and the U.S. was busy copycatting it, the British were implementing concentration camps as part of the Boer War in South Africa. So between 1899 and 1902, the British battled two Afrikaner republics, the Zuid-Afrikanische Republiek, or South African Republic, and the Orange Free State. The short version here is that these were the descendants of Dutch colonialists, and they were at war with the British. In 1900, their capital at Bloemfontein was captured, and some 20,000 combatants signed a pact of neutrality, laying down their arms and agreeing to no longer participate in the war, in exchange for going free back to their homes. This was about 1/3 of the total Boers, right? The males of military age at the time that were participating in combat. 3 months later, the Brits also controlled Pretoria, but the Boers, instead of going into open combat, they switched to a guerrilla campaign. In response, Lord Roberts, the chief commander of British forces, started a scorched earth policy. At first, they responded to attacks on rail lines by destroying the nearest Boer homestead, which then evolved to destroying all homesteads within a 10-mile radius of one of these attacks on rail lines. When Lord Kitchener took over in November of 1900, he began to burn homesteads, farms, and entire towns, and killing or capturing all livestock, even when there was no attack to justify it preemptively. In order to prevent the Boer guerrillas, from being able to resupply. Now, remember those oath takers, those 20,000 who laid down their arms? Lord Roberts, at this point, took them into, quote-unquote, protective custody in refugee camps. The scorched earth policy was increasingly leaving women and children homeless as well, so Roberts took them into the camps as well, forcibly. So now you have these 20,000 or so former combatants and their families being housed with tens of thousands of men, women, and children who are ostensibly families of the combatants still out in the fields into camps. This should be a familiar refrain by now, Adam. Food quality was poor, sanitation terrible, medical care scarce, and overcrowding was endemic. Measles and typhoid swept through the population of these camps. Between July of 1901 and February of 1902, captives died at an annualized rate of 1 out of every 4 people. This number peaked at 1 out of every 3 by October of 1901. In total, some 48,000 civilians died in the British camps during the Boer campaign. So yeah, we're exporting this stuff overseas. We start in the Americas, we go to the Pacific, we head over to Africa, and you know what? We're going to stay in Africa. Finally, we come to the Germans.
And this body count keeps rising.
But not those Germans. These were the Kaiser's Germans. The Herero Wars occurred from 1904 to 1908 in German Southwest Africa, today's Namibia, between the German Empire and the Herero and Nama peoples who were indigenous there. If you know anything about Namibia at all, it's that it's basically like super inhospitable. Loads of deserts, some grasslands, and a lot of raw resources, but not a huge amount of water, right? There's a lot of desert in the country and surrounding the country. So it's extremely inhospitable and land is at a premium. The abridged version here is that the relatively poor German settlers were looking to take advantage of the relatively prosperous locals who had all the best land and resources to themselves. They engaged in a series of attacks to try and provoke an armed response. Does that sound familiar? With the intention of getting a large enough response that they could call down the imperial military and forcibly take the Herero people's property and land. So, at first this failed. The Herero were actually a group that was fairly modern. They had adopted certain aspects of modern life, namely horses and guns, right? Again, 1900 or so. And they were actually well organized. They were actually a very kind of modern civilization. The German colonial governor struggled militarily, and he tried to go for a negotiated settlement. He's like, I can't beat these people. They're pretty good. The Kaiser replaced him with, and get this name, Adam, you're going to love this, Lieutenant General Lothar von Trotha.
Oh, Lothar. It sounds so like sci-fi. Oh, he's the villain of a movie. I know it somewhere.
He absolutely is. This is a fantastic movie villain named Lothar von Trotha. He was a veteran of both the Boxer Rebellion in China and the wars in the German East Africa colony on the other side of the continent. Von Trotha came in, and with some 1,500 troops and modern artillery, he defeated a force of 40,000 Herero and drove them into the Kalahari Desert. And he left orders to set up a perimeter and shoot anyone on sight who attempted to come out of the desert. At around the same time, the Nama peoples also rose up in combat against the colonialists. That shoot-to-kill order was dropped after 2 months when the Kaiser and the Reichschancellor Bernhard von Bülow, seeing what the Brits were up to in South Africa, ordered the implementation of Konzentrationslager, concentration camps. Unlike the others so far, where there was at least the illusion of protection for the captives from doing this for your own good, the camps were strictly for punishment and economic advantage. This is when we take a key turn in how we use them. From a write-up at worldwithoutgenocide.org. Survivors were placed in concentration camps where they were subjected to forced labor, abuse, starvation, and medical experimentation. The Nama people experienced similar conditions. It is estimated that 80%, approximately 65,000 people, of the Herero people and 50%, around 10,000, of the Nama people perished over the 4-year genocide in the camps. And you hear that was the UN's official conclusion in what's known as the Whitaker Report, that the actions of the German Empire in Namibia constituted the 20th century's first official genocide.
I was going to say, is that the first one? Yeah, that's crazy.
That is the first official one, correct. At least for the 20th century.
Yeah, so you're the Germans, you're like, okay, we got the first one, but now we got to do better than that.
Bigger of the sequel.
I guess so. Because it's just like we tell kids like, oh, we gotta try to teach them how to share and work together with other little kids and stuff like that. And then you see these adults just savagery with inability to like share resources or work together to mine resources or land or anything. Like, it's just like, no, I really just want it. I just want your shit. Give it to me. You don't want to give it to me? Okay, well, then I got to get rid of you. It's incredible.
You and I both have young children. It is wild, the difference between what we teach them, what they learn in school, and how we function as adults in the real world. Right. It is night and day. It's like, why do we even bother teaching our children good things if this is just what we're going to do and get older? It's nutty. Like, I think adults could use some time in kindergarten learning to share. Maybe,
so.
You know,
I
would just send people.
What is this
sharing? I think we should gather up people. We should gather up people with no empathy and put them into these let's not call them camps, let's call them schools, but put them under armed guard and teach them to fucking share. Wait, shit, I just reinvented concentration camps.
Yeah.
God damn it.
We'll call them sharing camps.
Sharing camps, yes.
Sounds like, oh my God, it sounds like a wonderful place.
We'll teach them to concentrate on best outcomes and the needs of both themselves and others.
I wonder if they did that. Maybe they could have figured something out. Oh my God.
Yeah. So I think we should pause for a moment and just take stock so far, right? Colonialism took what was not a super uncommon concept at this point, temporarily corralling captured combatants, and expanded on it. But to your point, this goes back to Rome, right? Capturing POWs and holding them. And before then, I'm sure. And they expanded on it to include civilians, much in the way the U.S. did with the Indian tribes, separating target enemy groups from the general population, including non-combatants, and concentrating them outside of the normal legal framework of jails and prisons. And we also start to see some just real odious justification for all this. We see it very clearly in the British example, where Lord Roberts is talking about utilizing the camps as a form of protective custody. Remember, he wasn't housing POWs, he was housing civilians, including those that had laid down their arms and agreed not to fight anymore, and they weren't. That same attitude of for your protection existed in the letters and documents around these decisions to some degree in Cuba, the Philippines, and the Mississippi River Valley that we saw for the soon-to-be former slaves. This is for your own protection, this is for your own good, is repeated by the Americans, the British, the Spanish, and others regarding these camps and their justification behind it. So yeah, look, whenever you're evaluating something that the government does, you should ask yourself if you'd be okay with it being done by an opposing politician or group that you don't like or don't trust, because whatever you allow your government to do to others, it will eventually be done to you.
Yeah. Well, at least you got to say this for the Republicans and Trump. The ICE camps, there's no, this is for your protection. There's no undertones to that. This is not for your protection. We just want to get rid of you.
Well, no, there is an element of that. This is for your protection. It's for our protection.
Yes.
And that's why they're so heavily pushing this story that all of these people, right, to a T, are criminals and they're dangerous. And we're actually, in part 2, we're going to get into a lot more of that and where that started, actually, because there's a change here that's critical to that.
But it's so interesting is that
By the way, take one guess as to who started that.
Which part?
That kind of change to the criminalization of these people and the perception that they should be criminalized.
Well, I would assume us.
I want to,
but
well, yeah, yes, us, but who specifically? I want you to take one good guess.
Would be Nixon.
Okay, close. We'll get to that. I'm not going to spoil it right now. You were going to say something?
That for propaganda purposes, when you're trying to portray that these people are so bad and that they are protecting you by getting rid of them, when you use overwhelming force of like 30 heavily armed masked people to take out one guy who's wearing like a t-shirt and pants, it doesn't give that impression at all.
Yeah,
you're protecting who again?
Masked, unmarked men grabbing people off the streets should be concerning. Don't live in a society with secret police.
We didn't.
Why is this? You're right. We did not. We currently are. It's concerning. So let's finish up. Let's get back on topic.
What was the answer to my?
Oh no, you're gonna have to wait. You got it wrong. So you're gonna So it wasn't Nixon. So you're gonna have to wait and learn. So, enter World War I. We now have multiple colonial powers using camps overseas, and now they're at war on their home soil. You want to guess what happens next?
Nothing good.
Nothing good. I'm going to quote from that book I mentioned earlier by Nicholas Voxman, The KL, A History of the Nazi Concentration Camps. Quote, "The era of the camps really began with the First World War, which brought them from faraway colonies into the European heartlands. In addition to POW camps holding millions of soldiers, many of the belligerent nations set up forced labor camps, refugee camps, and civilian internment camps driven by doctrines of total mobilization, radical nationalism, and social hygiene. Such camps were easy to establish and guard thanks to recent innovations like machine guns, cheap barbed wire, and mass-produced portable barracks. Conditions were worse across Central and Eastern Europe, where prisoners were often endured systematic forced labor, violence, and neglect. Several hundreds of thousands died. At the end of the First World War, Europe was littered with camps, and their memory lingered long after they had been dissolved." So, now that we've moved to Europe, we moved into the Western heartlands in the Imperial Center. I want to close out part 1 with gulags. Pew, 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 air horns.
But before I forget, because I have a feeling I would forget, is it, I don't want to say it makes sense, but because I know we weren't going to be talking about Nazi Germany and concentration camps, but it almost makes sense knowing this history that we've experienced, that you start rounding up Jews and putting them in camps, not a big deal. You're used to this already. You're used to people getting put in concentration camps, not a big deal. It's when it gets stepped up to another level is when it's like, oh. But it's like, what's the difference? What was the difference between 50 years ago? Well, 100 years ago, it's the same shit. So it's like, all right, whatever. They're putting some guys in concentration camps. So no big deal.
Once you start normalizing the detention of people outside of the prison system, yeah, it's not hard to justify even these tiny minor escalations into new groups, new ethnic groups, new atrocities. And that book, the KL, really shows you how that built and happened and how we got to the death camps, right? And all that stuff that happened at the end.
What
Didn't start that way.
Is it
KL is Konzentrationslager. It's concentration camp. It's a German abbreviation for it. Yes.
All right,
So,
Gulag time.
Yeah, Gulag. Well, not really. The Gulags were actually Stalin's innovations on a system that existed under the czars of the Russian Empire and that were adapted and expanded by the Bolsheviks, specifically Lenin and Trotsky, in the wake of the October Revolution. So the important part for us in this discussion is that the early evolution under the Bolsheviks, not the later one under Stalin, because it has critical elements that borrow from everyone else we've talked about so far, as well as the first instances of key changes that lead to our modern understanding of concentration camps. Mm-hmm. So Lenin and Trotsky drew their models for the Soviet camp system, pre-Stalin's reforms, from a mix of revolutionary necessity, Russian prison tradition, and direct inspiration from European colonial practice. Starting from the beginning, the Russian czars had used forced exile and labor camps as a means of punishment since the 1600s, most commonly for political dissidents and would-be and actual revolutionaries, but also for ethnic groups and common criminals. This is the classic banishment to Siberia. This could include hard labor, but was often simply internal exile. Get someone dangerous, far away from the population centers in the West was the goal behind this. Now, if you'd really pissed off the Tsar, they not only exiled you, but also assigned you to what was called a katorga, a forced labor camp where you were assigned to road building, logging, mining, etc. A good example of this is Dostoevsky, who was sent to a katorga after receiving his stay of execution from the Tsar. He described what should be familiar by now. In summer, intolerable closeness. In winter, unendurable cold. All the floors were rotten, filth on the floors an inch thick. One could slip and fall. We were packed like herrings in a barrel. There was no room to turn around. From dusk to dawn, it was impossible not to behave like pigs. Fleas, lice, and black beetles by the bushel. So all katorga prisoners were exiles, but not all exiles were katorga prisoners. Notably, multiple future Bolshevik leaders like Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, among others, were all exiled at one point or another, and so they had first-hand familiarity with this system. Fast forward to the First World War in 1917, and I'm really going to skim over this because it's important, but not strictly relevant to today's topic, and this is already a long enough series of episodes as it is. Russia gets its ass handed to it in battle, as they usually do. The economy is collapsing, labor strikes are common, there's political agitation, and the February Revolution, the first of Russia's two revolutions, succeeds in getting Tsar Nicholas to abdicate the throne, which worked out really great for him and his family in the long term. The failures of the provisional government under Kerensky leads to the October Revolution, where the Bolsheviks seize power. Lenin and the Bolsheviks know they're in danger of failure like the provisional government under Kerensky, so they create a new label of quote-unquote class enemies and repurpose the existing World War I prisoner of war camps to corral political opponents and anti-Bolshevik fighters. I'm going to quote from Gulag, A History by Anne Applebaum. Against this background of improvisation and violence, the first Soviet labor camps were born. Like so many other Bolshevik institutions, they were created ad hoc, in a hurry, as an emergency measure in the heat of the Civil War. This is not to say the idea had no prior appeal. 3 weeks before the October Revolution, Lenin himself was already sketching out an admittedly vague plan to organize obligatory work duty for wealthy capitalists. Lenin's vision of labor camps as a special form of punishment for a particular sort of bourgeois enemy sat well with his other beliefs about crime and criminals. Bolshevik legal theorists who followed in his wake also reckoned that the creation of the Soviet state would create a new kind of criminal, the class enemy. A class enemy opposed the revolution and worked openly, or more often secretly, to destroy it. The class enemy was harder to identify than an ordinary criminal, and much harder to reform. Unlike an ordinary criminal, a class enemy could never be trusted to cooperate with the Soviet regime, and required harsher punishment than would an ordinary murderer or thief. From the very earliest days of this new Soviet state, in other words, people were to be sentenced not for what they had done, but for who they were. So here's the thing, Adam. Class enemy was never clearly defined. Do we have a similar situation here in the past month with not clearly defining a group of enemies? Antifa Executive Order and NSPM 7. So these class enemy designation led to widespread random arrests, incarcerations, and even capital punishment, all in the name of protecting the revolution from its enemies. Now, revolutions are chaotic at the best of times, and the arbitrary arresting of class enemies didn't help. Wardens in prisons were being sent masses of prisoners they didn't even know were coming. And police stations would have no idea where to send or what to do with large groups of prisoners that they were rounding up. The Bolsheviks, specifically their secret police, the Cheka, the KGB's predecessors, who were charged with protecting the revolution from its enemies, they needed to get creative. I'm going to continue from Applebaum. The disarray forced the Cheka to come up with new solutions. The Bolsheviks could hardly allow their real enemies to enter the ordinary prison system. Chaotic jails and lazy guards might be suitable for pickpockets and juvenile delinquents, but for saboteurs, parasites, speculators, white army officers, priests, bourgeois capitalists, and others who loom so large in the Bolshevik imagination, more creative solutions were needed. A solution was found as early as June 4, 1918. Trotsky called for a group of unruly Czech war prisoners to be pacified, disarmed, and placed in a Konzlager, a concentration camp. 12 days later, in a memorandum addressed to the Soviet government, Trotsky again spoke of concentration camps, outdoor prisons in which the city and village bourgeoisie shall be mobilized and organized into rear service battalions to do menial work, cleaning barracks, camps, streets, digging trenches, etc. Those refusing will be fined and held under arrest until the fine is paid. In August, Lenin made use of the term as well in a telegram to the commissars of Penza, site of an anti-Bolshevik uprising. He called for mass terror against the kulaks, rich peasants, priests, and white guards, and for the unreliable to be locked up in a concentration camp outside town. The facilities were already in place. During the summer of 1918, in the wake of the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, which ended Russia's participation in the First World War, the regime freed 2 million war prisoners. The empty camps were immediately turned over to the Cheka. So there it is. We've gone from concentrating foreign nations and ethnic groups, guerrilla combatants, civilians potentially aligned with guerrilla combatants, to POWs. We're now at the point where concentration camps are being used in the first time in the modern world as a tool for repressing a nation's own citizens in the name of protecting the broader population and, by extension, the government. Mm-hmm. So, specifically in the Soviet Union, the shift was very much ideological, from one of colonization and punishment to re-education and forced labor for economic progress. This held up through 1929 until Stalin turbocharged the system and reorganized it into what we know today as the Gulag, with some 500 main campsites and numerous satellite camps. Then this is what we know in the popular imagination. And that's it for part one, Adam. In part two, we're going to shift back to the U.S. for good and how it continued to build on what we've seen here and take a look at America today in 2025 and try to filter through the partisan BS to get a grip on what's happening today and how the camps have evolved and changed and how they fundamentally are, in a lot of ways, similar to everything that we've heard so far today.
It's like our first episode cliffhanger.
Done. What's going to happen? How's America going to do this? I don't know. It's exciting. It's like watching. It's like watching Titanic. It's like, what's going to happen? I don't know.
This boat's going to sink. I don't know how it's going to happen. That's good.
Buddy, how you feeling so far?
I feel very informed.
Okay.
We shouldn't speak for we as in everyone, but like I never looked at concentration camps prior to World War II, other than Japanese internment camps. I assume that we did shit like that with the Indians and the Native Americans to some extent. That's why that were my first choice in that.
Yep.
But like I said, like you never really, the term concentration camp has been so like deformed because of the extermination camps that then you start thinking like, oh, this was such commonplace. Like everybody's doing it. It's like, it's in fashion.
Once it started, yeah, it became fashionable, and it became, again, just out of necessity, just a thing that people defaulted to, as we see time and again, right? Once it started, you couldn't stop. And one of the things we didn't touch on was just, look, guerrilla insurgencies were common at this point, right? Guerrilla warfare is the reason the Italian peninsula was united. It was, in the late 19th century, it was the reason for so many successful revolutions and battles against imperial powers, right? And why warfare has changed so much. Because you don't meet in open battle against a superior armed enemy. You attack their supply lines, you harass them in their camps, you burn their supplies and everything, right? You attack the mechanisms of the state to get to your aims. And so how do you fight that? You can't fight that in open warfare. And so it devolves into this barbarity. A lot of ways we talked about with fascism, and we talked about in Italy, right, the years of lead, where violence on one side or the other would escalate and just cause, right, an equal and opposite reaction to be occurred. This is almost a logical outcome of, well, we don't know how to fight this, so we're going to get even more barbaric and more depraved in how we approach this.
Right. But to start most of them, not all of them, is, well, this is being caused by what we're doing, and is what we're doing. Should we really be doing this? I understand, like, outside looking in, when you have refugee crises where you're trying to help them, but you can only provide so much to them to help them, and it becomes a form of concentration camp, and there's just little you can do because of what's happening. But when you're causing what's happening, and it's called, therefore, creating the concentration camp, is what you're doing really that necessary to create this situation? Do you really, especially when after you said about the Spanish-American War, I'm like, okay, you saw it. Hey, this was probably wrong. Probably not the real reason why you're doing anything about it. Anyway, but okay, we're going to do this so you could stop this. Hey, do you remember a couple years ago? No, I don't remember anything. Okay, let's do this over here in the Philippines. It's just like, what? Did those bodies that you just saw a few years ago not mean anything? Is what you're doing now so different than what was happening before? Other than it's for you? No.
You are going to love part 2 because you just hit on a major thing. A lot of this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's literally just us. It's a problem caused, that it's a completely man-made problem. As in, we have chosen to do this, and we are making it a bigger problem as a result, and we don't have to. We really don't have to. We have alternatives. We just choose to go along this path. So, let's wrap this up. Everyone be good, and see you in part 2.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Idiots Seeking Village is a production of Village Idiots Media. For more, find us online at villageidiotsmedia.com or find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and wherever you get podcasts.